The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night, turning the circular driveway of the Ashford estate into a river of reflected light. Elena Morales stood at the servants' entrance, her key turning uselessly in the lock. Someone had changed it. Her soaked uniform clung to her shoulders, and her phone that for the past hours sat useless in her pocket. Through the tall windows of the mansion, she could see the glow of the chandelier in the grand foyer, warm and untouchable. She'd worked in that house for 3 years, cleaned every corner, knew every creak in the floorboards. But tonight, for the first time, she was locked out, and somewhere inside, 2 small faces were pressed against a second-story window, watching her with wide, worried eyes. What Elena didn't know was that in less than an hour, those children would make a choice that would shatter the carefully constructed lies holding the Ashford family together. It had started that morning, as most disasters do, quietly, with a single careless word. Victoria Ashford stood in her walk-in closet, surveying rows of designer gowns with the critical eye of someone perpetually dissatisfied. Elena was steaming a silk dress nearby, her movements careful and precise. "You missed a spot," Victoria said without looking up. Elena glanced at the fabric. "There was no spot. I'll check again, Mrs. Ashford." "You know," Elena, Victoria continued, her voice taking on that particular edge Elena had learned to recognize. "I've been thinking we're overpaying for housekeeping, especially given the quality of work." Elena said nothing. She'd learned that silence was the safest response. But 7-year-old Lily, who'd wandered into the closet looking for her mother, spoke up with the blunt honesty only children possessed. "But Mommy, you said Elena is the best housekeeper we've ever had. You said that to Mrs. Chen last week." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Lily, go find your brother." "But you did say now." The little girl left, confused by her mother's sudden anger, and Elena, carefully hanging the dress, felt the shift in the air the way a rabbit senses a hawk's shadow. Victoria was planning something. She just didn't know what yet. The Ashford mansion sat on 12 acres in Connecticut's Gold Coast, a monument to old money and new ambition. Jonathan Ashford had inherited the real estate empire from his father, along with the pressure to expand it, modernize it, prove himself worthy of the name. He spent 16-hour days at the office, came home to a wife who spoke in percentages and status updates, and barely knew his own children. His twins were raised by nannies, tutors, and Elena, the quiet woman who remembered their allergies, sang them Spanish lullabies, and never asked for anything in return. But Jonathan didn't see that. He saw balance sheets and board meetings and the constant, gnawing fear that he was failing to live up to his father's legacy. So when Victoria mentioned over breakfast that they should restructure household expenses, he nodded absently and signed whatever papers she put in front of him. He didn't read them. He should have. That afternoon, Elena received a text from Margaret Chen, the estate manager, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd worked for the Ashfords longer than anyone. "Victoria changed the door codes and locks. She's setting you up. Be careful tonight." Elena's heart sank. She texted back, "Why would she do that?" Margaret's response was immediate, "Because the twins love you more than they love her." It was true. Lily and Lucas gravitated to Elena the way plants lean toward sunlight. When Lucas had nightmares, he called for Elena. When Lily scraped her knee, she ran to Elena first. And Victoria, who measured her worth in control and appearances, couldn't stand it. So she'd decided to erase the problem, make Elena disappear, frame it as incompetence or theft or simply abandonment. And Jonathan, too busy to notice, wouldn't question it until it was too late. That evening, Elena finished her work at 6 o'clock, just as the storm rolled in. She gathered her things, said goodnight to the twins who hugged her longer than usual, as if they sensed something, and headed to the servants' entrance. The key didn't work. She tried the side door, also changed. The front entrance was locked and alarmed. She knocked, but no one came. Her phone died as she tried to call Margaret. And then the rain started, cold, relentless, soaking through her coat in seconds. She stood under the narrow overhang by the kitchen door, shivering, wondering if she should walk the 2 miles to the main road in the dark. That's when she heard a small voice from above. "Miss Elena." She looked up. Lucas was leaning out of his bedroom window, his face pale with worry. "They locked you out. Mommy told the security system to ignore the doors." Before Elena could respond, Lily appeared beside her brother. "We're going to let you in." "No, sweethearts, it's okay," Elena called up, her voice shaking from the cold. "I'll find another way." But the twins were already gone, and 30 seconds later, the front door of the Ashford mansion swung open, revealing 2 small figures in matching pajamas, barefoot and determined. Elena hesitated. If she went inside, Victoria would twist it into trespassing, breaking and entering, something criminal. But if she stayed outside in the storm, she risked hypothermia. The twins made the choice for her. They ran out into the rain, grabbed her hands, and pulled her inside. "You're freezing," Lily said, her voice high with alarm. Lucas dragged a throw blanket from the couch and wrapped it around Elena's shoulders. "We'll make you tea, just like you make for us." And in that moment, as the 7-year-olds tried to care for the woman who'd cared for them, something in Elena broke. Not her dignity, never that, but the wall she'd built around her heart to survive in a world that treated her as invisible. "Thank you," she whispered, tears mixing with rainwater on her face. "Thank you," my loves. That's when Victoria appeared at the top of the staircase. Her expression was ice and fury. What is she doing in my house? We let her in, Lucas said proudly. She was locked outside in the rain. She doesn't have permission to be here after hours, Victoria said, descending the stairs with the slow, deliberate menace of someone who knows they hold all the power. This is trespassing. I'm calling the police. Elena stood, still dripping, the blanket around her shoulders. Mrs. Ashford, the locks were changed without telling me. I was just trying to what? Break into my home. Steal from me. Victoria pulled out her phone. You have 30 seconds to leave, or I press send. The twins looked between the two women, confused and frightened. But Mummy, Lily said, her voice small. Miss Elena didn't do anything wrong. This is an adult matter, Victoria snapped. Go to your rooms. No, it was Lucas who spoke, and his little voice was shaking but firm. You're being mean, and that's wrong. For a moment, Victoria looked genuinely shocked. Her children, her well-trained, obedient children, were defying her. Lucas Ashford, you go to your room right now. Or what? The voice came from the doorway. Margaret Chen stepped inside, shaking rain from her umbrella, her expression calm but her eyes blazing. Or you'll punish them for showing basic human decency. That's an interesting parenting strategy, Victoria. Victoria's face flushed. This is none of your concern, Margaret. Actually, Margaret said, setting down her briefcase with deliberate care, it is, because I've been keeping records, and I think it's time we had a conversation about what's really going on in this house. The room went silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Elena stood frozen, the twins clinging to her sides. Victoria's hand tightened around her phone, and Margaret opened her briefcase. You changed the locks to set Elena up for a false accusation, Margaret said, her voice even and factual. You've been skimming from the household budget and blaming discrepancies on staff. You've been verbally abusing employees and using NDAs to silence them. And you've been forging your husband's signature on financial documents to fund your personal expenses. Victoria went pale. That's slander. It's documentation, Margaret said, pulling out a thick folder. 3 years' worth, bank statements, text messages, security footage. I've been waiting for you to cross a line that even Jonathan couldn't ignore. Locking a woman out in a storm while children watch. That's the line. At that moment, the front door opened again, and Jonathan Ashford walked in, soaked and exhausted from a late meeting. He took in the scene, his wife's panicked face, Margaret's briefcase, Elena wrapped in a blanket with his children, the tension thick as smoke. What's going on? He asked slowly. Margaret handed him the folder. Your wife has been committing fraud, embezzlement, and employee abuse. Elena was locked out tonight as part of a scheme to fire her without severance and frame her for theft. Your children disobeyed orders and let her in, because they have more integrity at 7 years old than your wife has at 30. Jonathan looked at Victoria, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Is this true? She's lying, Victoria said quickly. She's always hated me. She's jealous. Victoria. His voice was quiet but absolute. Is it true? The silence stretched. Then Victoria laughed, a bitter, brittle sound. You'll never hear, Jonathan. You care more about your father's legacy than your own family. I had to do something to feel like I mattered. The money, the control. She stopped, realizing she'd just confessed. Jonathan looked down at the folder in his hands, then at his children, who were still holding onto Elena like a lifeline. Margaret, call our lawyer. Victoria, pack a bag. You're staying in the guest house until we sort this out legally. Victoria's face crumpled. You're choosing the maid over me. I'm choosing honesty over fraud, Jonathan said quietly. And I'm choosing my children over your ego. 3 months later, Elena Morales stood in the kitchen of the Ashford estate, but this time she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a blouse and slacks, sitting at the breakfast table with Lily and Lucas, helping them with homework while Jonathan made coffee. The divorce had been swift and decisive. Victoria was facing charges for embezzlement and fraud. Margaret had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer of Ashford Enterprises, and Jonathan had offered her a position as the twins' full-time nanny, with a real salary, benefits, and respect. Her daughter's medical bills were covered. She had weekends off. And most importantly, she had the love of 2 children who taught their father what courage looked like. Miss Elena, Lily said, looking up from her math worksheet. Are you happy here? Elena smiled, tears prickling her eyes. I am, sweetheart, I really am. Jonathan, pouring coffee, caught her eye and nodded a silent acknowledgement of the debt he could never fully repay. Because she hadn't just worked for his family, she'd saved it, by being exactly who she was, steady, kind, and worthy of the love to small children had refused to let the world take away. If this story reminded you that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.